If you were to dash jump at an enemy and hit it with a red gauge hit with the Jackhammer, you'd reach around 105 horizontal units per second. For context, the fastest traditional weapon-based movement, an Ultra Boost, will send you flying at a whopping 143 horizontal units per second, and it costs a 16-second cooldown and half your HP bar. So, considering the resource cost, the Jackhammer is pretty balanced, right? It puts one of your highest damage weapons on a pretty long cooldown, requires a good bit of setup time, and doesn't send you nearly as fast as some of the faster options in the game. So then, what the hell is this? Hi, my name is Vivian, and I've been an Ultrakill speedrunner for 2 years now. I have nearly 300 runs submitted to speedrun.com, and some of my biggest accomplishments are on screen now. I'm also known for having some controversial opinions about the speedrunning scene. Speaking of controversial, jackhammers. Before we look into this, the most important thing to note is that everything I talk about here is specifically in the context of speedrunning. More specifically, the way Jackhammer interacts with the player's speed. More casual applications of balance, such as how much damage the weapon does, is not being considered or talked about here, as plenty of other people have already gone into detail about it. I also acknowledge that this game is not made for speedrunners, and the casual experience comes first. Despite this, it's still worth talking about how things are balanced in a speedrunning specific context, as it's been made clear that the developers are willing to extend consideration to us as long as it doesn't interfere with the average player's experience. So, before we can talk about what's wrong with the Jackhammer, first we have to talk about how it works. The Jackhammer has 3 tiers as indicated by the gauge on the weapon's model. The color of the gauge corresponds to how fast V1 is currently moving. A green gauge hit does 3 damage and adds around 8 horizontal units to your current speed. A yellow hit deals 6 damage and adds around 30 units of speed. And a red hit deals 10 damage and adds around 55 units of speed to your current speed. Since we're talking about speedrunning, all that matters in 99.9% of cases is the red gauge, since it applies when going any speed above 50 horizontal units per second, which is extremely easy to reach. 55 units of speed added to your current speed does not sound like that much. That's only as much as a dash. However, an additional 50 horizontal units per second is a way bigger difference than it may sound. I mean, 50 units is the difference between a dash jump and a max speed super slide jump. Furthermore, adding over 50 horizontal units to your speed is way different than just going 50 horizontal units. I'll show you an example. If we exclude rail cannon and exclude jackhammers for now, the fastest speed you can go is 100 horizontal units per second from a max speed sideways SSJ. If you don't know what an SSJ or a super slide jump is, there's a really good video by weaponless runner Delilah that goes over what they are. You can find a link to it down in the description. I recommend familiarizing yourself since I'm going to be mentioning them a few times throughout the video. So at most, with a max speed jackhammer, without using rail cannon, the highest speed you can reach is somewhere in the 150s, right? And it requires a good bit of setup, needing you to hit a max speed sideways SSJ, which is a frame perfect input, before hitting the enemy. While yes, it's faster than an Ultra Boost despite not using the rail cannon and no self-damage, the resource cost seems relatively balanced, right? That's a good bit of setup. Well, the issue lies in the fact that we have yet to consider vertical speed. The Jackhammer will also take into account your vertical speed when adding speed to the boost. So, that very specific railless condition in which you can go up to 150 units by performing a frame-perfect input, you could also do the same thing by doing this. Or 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 this. This. All you have to do is slam for, at minimum, 1 frame before a red gauge hit, and you will instantly gain speeds faster than that of an Ultra Boost. Jackhammer's additive speed, when combined with more resource-costly setups, can allow you to reach absolutely absurd speeds. Say, for example, Jackhammer boosting out of an Ultra Boost, or another Jackhammer boost, and then if you add another. What if you keep going? I think you see the point. Chaining these boosts together is made even easier by the quote-unquote grace period between Jackhammer boosts. That may sound a little weird, but essentially what I mean is, say you're going an extremely fast speed. If you slow down in between that and the Jackhammer boost, you'll still retain your previously highest speed if the boost is done within a certain period of time. It'd be easier if I just showed you. Let's say you wanted to Jackhammer boost out of an Ultra Boost, which should bring you to around 200 to 220 horizontal units per second. Even if you significantly slowed your speed in between the Ultra Boost and the Jackhammer hit, say for example by landing on the ground, dashing, walking, slamming, sliding, etc., there's still a small grace period in which your previously fastest speed will be the one considered, and thus you will get the Jackhammer boost as if you were still going that speed, still sending you in that 200 and 215 units range. Here's a practical example of this in an actual world record on speedrun.com. Now, this grace period exists to make casual gameplay feel more fluid, which I think is great and makes the weapon feel amazing to use. I'm simply explaining this to provide more context on the advanced mechanics of the weapon, and I do not think it's an issue whatsoever. Anyway, the point is, the Jackhammer goes fast. Really fast. So why is this an issue? It's one of the most fun mechanics in the game, and the entire point of the weapon. Well, as we've learned in the past, fun does not always equal balance. While prior examples of something fun getting nerfed, such as Whiplash and Rocket Riding, are not one-to-one comparisons, the point is that just because people really like something and think it's extremely fun, or is extremely fun, that doesn't mean it should stay the way it is if it's unbalanced. I think it's time to take a deeper look at the game's balance as a whole from the speedrunning point of view. More specifically, I want to look at what I've coined as the speed economy of Ultrakill. In Ultrakill, different movement options send you at different speeds, obviously. Simultaneously, these different movement options also have different resource costs. To illustrate this, I will use this graph. The y-axis represents the amount of speed in horizontal units that each movement option gives you. The x-axis represents resource cost, so the further to the right you go, the higher the resource cost. When I refer to resource cost, I mean how much setup time the movement requires, how difficult it is to perform, how much health it costs, and how valuable of a cooldown it costs. Going back to the graph, let's explain this. This part is going to be a little long-winded, but just stick with me here. Let's go through a few of these and explain why they're placed where they are. Over here on the left, we have our basic movement options: walking, sliding, dashing, etc. These all have extremely low resource costs, in the sense that all you have to do is press a button and it happens. And fittingly, they all give very low speed. Here in this middle section, we have the more common movement techs at a medium resource cost. Over on the left side, we have rocket riding with a very low resource cost because all you have to do is just get on a rocket. Right next to it is a floor fup, which is also very easy to perform and costs pretty much nothing but your rocket cooldown. Next, we have core reject boosts and oil boosts. Both of these cost 35 HP while requiring no setup time and being very quick to perform. To the right, we have the slide speed cap. The actual movement here is very easy to perform, as all you have to do is slide jump dive, etc. But it requires you to have already been going fast enough to reach the speed, which is a lot of prior setup needed, either requiring a prior movement option like a core reject boost or something like slam storage, which costs a lot of time. Next, we have dash SSJs. Now, despite dash SSJs being weaponless and requiring no setup time, they're still the same speed as something like a core reject boost. But since SSJs are a frame-perfect input, they are balanced by the difficulty of performing the tech. Therefore, they land right here in the middle. Now moving over to the right side of the graph, we have our high resource cost options. For example, Jam Blast costs 35 to 50 health and require you to set up a max charge overpump, which is a lot of setup time. In terms of resource cost, max speed SSJs are the same as slide speed cap in the sense that you have to already have enough momentum in order to reach the speed, usually requiring some sort of prior setup. But due to the mechanical difficulty of the frame-perfect timing of super slide jumps, their resource cost is comparatively much higher. And then finally, we have our only extremely high cost option, that being the Ultra Boost. Like I said in the beginning, the Ultra Boost costs your longest weapon cooldown and 50% of your health. Because of this, it is the highest resource cost out of any movement tech in the game. So looking at this graph, it seems pretty straightforward, right? The higher the resource cost, the faster you'll go. Which makes sense. You should be rewarded for performing more difficult or costly techs with a higher speed. It's basic balancing. This is the state of Ultrakill's speed economy, excluding Jackhammers. So, what happens if you include them? As you can see, Jackhammers sort of fundamentally break this scale. You may look at this graph and think I'm just skewing it toward my own bias, but let me give you my reasoning. Here in the middle, we have a red gauge Jackhammer hit, similar to what I talked about in the beginning. By slamming right before your red gauge hit, you can always reach 150 units per second at minimum. Now the Jackhammer has a relatively long cooldown upon hitting a red gauge hit, but performing this is not hard in the slightest and typically requires no setup time, on top of costing 0 health. In fact, it heals you. Next, a Plink boost. Okay, so I forgot to talk about Plink boost earlier, but essentially this is what it is. Since the Jackhammer speed is additive, you can add even more speed to this by hitting yourself with an explosion during the hit stop to add roughly another 50 horizontal units to the boost's speed. The easiest way to do this is by using the alternate core ejects core, and it's pretty easy and for some reason only consistent on 120 FPS, I don't know why. Anyway, the point is that it gives you a bunch of speed because it adds another like 50 to 70 units of speed to your red gauge hit, and you can even combine it with things like UB Jackhammer boost to reach absurd speeds for like no cost whatsoever. It's really funny. Which is very similar to a regular red gauge hit. The only difference is it costs 1 extra input, a 3-second cooldown, and a tiny bit of health. Then all the way to the right, we have a Jackhammer boost off of an Ultra Boost, which is self-explanatory. And then to the right of it, at our highest cost, we have consecutive Jackhammer boosts, which usually require a lot of prior speed and a lot of setup time, as well as costing multiple Jackhammer cooldowns. So, as you can see, Jackhammers just do too much for too little. I don't think the inherent concept of a weapon giving you a lot of speed is unbalanced, I just think it needs to have a resource cost that is in line with the rest of the game. Now, a lot of people will say that it just doesn't matter. If it's fun and it isn't unbalanced to the casual player base, why does it matter? Well, speedrun balance is a real thing, as I said earlier. Very much so, in fact. It's always, like, so hard to make this argument because I fully understand people finding it fun and finding routes with something. It's just, it's so strong. And I think a lot of people just don't fully realize that. Another valid argument I've heard is that because the Jackhammer requires an enemy to boost off of, it's too niche or situational and isn't applicable in very many spots. My counterargument is, firstly, just because something is only situationally applicable, it does not mean it's balanced. If you could clip out of the start room and timer manipulation to the end of the level, but it was only legal in like 2-2 weaponless, would it be balanced? No! That's a more extreme example, but you get the point. Secondly, the game is about enemies. There's enemies all throughout the game. You're gonna have something to boost off of.
Okay then, Vivian, if that even is your real name. If you know so much about game balance, what do you propose they change?
Well, truthfully, I don't know. I'm not a game developer, believe it or not. The purpose of this video was to show why I think this needs a change from a more objective point of view, while also sparking discussion. As it's been said by every game developer before, if the players balanced the game, it would suck shit. However, I have two proposed changes. Firstly, the way easier to implement from a game dev side of things is that I think the Jackhammer needs a flat speed nerf, plain and simply. Make yellow gauge give you like 20 speed and red gauge give like 30. 50 additive units to your current speed is just insane. Literally all you have to do is press the left click on your mouse. That's it. A super slide jump is half of that speed, and it's a frame perfect input. I get that it's weaponless, but still the point remains. It's a lot of speed for just nothing. Now, I know a lot of people are adverse to a flat nerf, which I can totally understand. A lot of pre-existing routes would be just slower, and it would just not be as fun as right now. Now, right before I was about to finish this video, there's a better idea that fellow runner Nirichi brought up. It's just a little harder to explain and way harder to implement from a development side of things. Essentially, what Nirichi proposed is, what if the Jackhammer's additive speed was percentage-based relative to how fast the player is going? For example, if you're going the minimum of 50 units per second when you hit the red gauge, the speed you gain would be more like, say, 25 added speed. But if you're going like 100 units or more, then you gain the full 50 speed. This is not a perfect change, as it would raise more questions about how to balance the speed of the other gauge hits, and theoretically the slamming for one frame thing I mentioned earlier would still give you the max speed, so a way to circumvent or nerf that would have to be implemented, or else the change just wouldn't do anything. And all of it is just way harder to implement from a game dev perspective, but it's still a concept to think about. If nothing else, I wholeheartedly believe the Jackhammer's speed needs to be nerfed. I hope I was able to bring up some valid points about all of this, and I hope this can lead to some productive discussion about the weapon in the future. Thank you everyone who helped me with this video, credits on screen now, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, consider joining the Ultrakill Speedrunning Discord, as it's where we all hang out. It's also where the discussion of Jackhammer's balance will be had in the future, as well as other balancing stuff. If you're interested in speedrunning at all, I wholeheartedly recommend joining.